That there is the Yemenite accent. I'm going to be employing various accents, I assume, over the course of this reading. And the Jews, over the course of the years, over thousands and thousands of years, dating back to the Bible itself, different people have pronounced Hebrew differently. So in general, I'll be using the Hebrew as it is utilized by the people that I originally come from, the people who educated me, the yeshiva people in America. But I will do different accents, I presume, as we go along. And what I'm going to be doing is Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum. That is twice reading the original Hebrew and once translation. So for every separate area, for every separate section of this week's Torah portion, I will be reading it first in the Hebrew and then Hebrew with the English translation. Let us get started. Bear in mind, the first section in Hebrew, and this is for everybody, even if you don't know any Hebrew. I hope that you can enjoy anyway and relate to the cadence of what's being read. And then we'll go over it all with the English translation. V'hoya. Ki savay el haaretz asher Yehovah Elohecha noisen lecha nachala v'yirishta v'yashavta ba v'lokachta mereishis kol pri ha'adama asher tovi me'artzecha asher Yehovah Elohecha noisen lach v'samta vatene v'halachta el hamokim asher yivchar Yehovah Elohecha l'shakein shmo sham uvasa el hakoyin asher yeh bayom mahem v'amarta elav higadati hayoim liYehovah Elohecha ki vasi el haaretz asher nishbar Yehovah la'avoseinu laseis lanu V'lokach hakoyin atene ariyadecha v'hinichai lifnei mizbach Yehovah Elohecha v'anisa v'amarta lifnei Yehovah Elohecha arami oived ovi v'yered mitzrayma v'yogor sham b'msei me'ot v'hisham legoy godol otzum v'rov v'yoreu esonu hamitzrim v'ya'anunu v'yitnu aleinu avoda kosha Vanitzak el Yehovah Elohei Avosenu, Vayishma Yehovah es Kailenu, Vayar es Onyenu, V'esam Aleinu V'es Lachatzenu, Vayitzienu Yehovah miMitzrayim b'yad chazaka, U'v'zroya netuya, U'v'moira gadol, U'v'oisos, U'v'moifsim, Vayivienu el hamokim hazeh, Vayitein lonu es haaretz hazois eretz zovas cholav udvash. V'ata hine he vesi es reishis pri ha'adama asher nosata li Yehovah v'hinachta lifnei Yehovah Elohecha v'ishtachavisa lifnei Yehovah Elohecha v'samachta v'chol ha'tov asher nasan lecha Yehovah Elohecha u'leveisecha ata v'halevi v'hager asher b'kirbecha. This here is a very beautiful, beautiful section. According to the greatest of all compilers of Judaism, all summarizers of Judaism over the course of the last few thousand years, the greatest, other than Moses, of the Bible itself, of the 5 books of Moses, of the Pentateuch itself. Other than Moses, the universally acknowledged, generally acknowledged, greatest of all was Maimonides, whose name was Moses as well. Moshe ad Moshe le'kom k'Moshe. From Moses until Moses, nobody arose like Moses. Moses, Maimonides, said that in the future, when the Messiah will arrive, his first responsibility before building the temple will be to destroy Amalek. This here is an unbelievable thing that I can't get very much into right now, but to destroy Amalek. Amalek was a cousin of the Jewish people. You might recall the Jews descend from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Abraham had other children who were not Jewish, and Isaac had another son who was not Jewish as well. His name was Esav, or in English, Esau. And from Esau eventually comes Amalek. Amalek is a nation descended from Esau who had the nerve to go and attack the Jewish people when they first left Egypt, when they were weak, and attack them instead of from the front and addressing them as relatives, or at least as enemies from the front openly, went and sniped at their back, sniped at their rear, those that were the weakest. So the previous portion of the Torah ends off as follows, and that's why this week's Torah portion continues, Vehoya, and when it comes to pass. It's continuing from before. So we're going to go to the previous portion, the previous parsha, because each Torah section, even though the Torah itself, the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch itself, the beginning of the Bible, which, as I discussed in a previous talk, the Bible is 24 books in total, divided into 3 sections. The Torah, the Nevi'im, which means prophets, and the Ksuvim, which means writings. The first section of the Torah is just 5 out of 24. And then, of course, there are various Christian groups that add on various other books thereafter from the Bible. But the universally acknowledged Bible, since before there was a Jesus, is these 24 books. And the first 5, most important of all, in fact, there's a group of people in Israel today called the Samaritans, the Shomronim. There's only a few hundred of them still around, but they've been around since forever. And the Samaritans only accept the 5 books of Moses as officially the word from God, the essential aspect of their Judaism. And all Jews, to this very day, still accept this as the essential word of God. Divided into 54 parts, a different section read every week. We're reading from this week's Torah portion, but it continues from the previous Torah portion, which goes as follows, the last few verses. And like I started to say, the word parsha means division. So essentially, even though the 5 books of Moses are divided into 54 divisions, within each division there are smaller divisions. And if you look inside a Torah scroll itself, I'll show you an example here from the Chumash. A Chumash is a Torah scroll that is printed on paper rather than a scroll. you can see where there are spaces. So we're going to be reading starting over here. See, this week's Torah portion begins over here, V'hoya. And last week's Torah portion ends over here. But between here and here is one paragraph. Now you can see in this week's Torah portion, over here only a little space is left. That implies that this is connected to this, but it is separate in some small fashion. Whereas when you have a large space open like that, it means that the next section is its own independent section. This week's Torah portion is a continuation from earlier. Earlier, the last few verses, that last section reads as follows. Zachor, although it's a little bit dark in here, so I'm going to go back to the phone. Zachor es asher oselecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you, baderech, on the path, b'tzeischa mitzrayim, when you left Egypt. Asher korcha baderech, that encountered you on the path. Vayezaneh b'cha, and they attacked your tail. They were afraid to attack you up front. Instead, they were surreptitious, and they attacked you from the back. Bear in mind that in the Jewish Bible, there is a command that you're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart. The command is that if you have a problem with somebody, you need to address them face to face. You're not allowed to go from behind. You're not allowed to hate them secretly. That's why this is so considered so ugly. Remember how they attacked your tail. All those who were stragglers behind you. If you were tired, you had just left 430 years of slavery. You were worn out. And you did not fear God. You didn't have that connection yet with God. And therefore were especially weak. And therefore, when Yehovah, your God, gives you rest from all your enemies misaviv that are around you, ba'aretz, in your own land, asher Yehovah elehecha noisen lecha nachal l'rishta, that Yehovah, your God, gives you to inherit, timche, wipe out, erase, es zecher Amalek, the memory of Amalek, mitachas hashemayim, from under the heavens, lo tishkach, don't forget. This, what we're reading this week, is from the 5th book of Moses, called Deuteronomy, or Dvarim, which is a Mishnah Torah, a review of Torah. It's a review and a continuation at the end of Moses' life, various speeches that explain more details from the first 4 books of Moses. And this takes place in the book of Exodus, and it's said there, as a matter of fact, the very first mention of the idea of writing in the entire Bible is dealing with Amalek, where Moses is told by God, write it down. Because in general, the Jewish Bible, going way back to Adam and Eve, is not a fan of writing, is not a fan of dealing with the future, is not a fan of making calculations and plans for the future, but in living in the moment, in Eden. But since we left Eden, we need some sort of guidance. We need some sort of rules. And for this, the Torah is willing to say, write it down. The very first time the word writing shows up, write it down. Remember, in the future, never forget to wipe out the memory of Amalek, which is an extraordinary thing that I can't really get into right now because I want to read a little more from this week's Torah portion. And this week's Torah portion then starts off, continuing from before, V'hoya, and when it comes to pass. As Maimonides says, Moses ben Maimon, Maimonides, Abu Imran ibn Abdullah, Rambam, he is the greatest of the compilers of Judaism, of understanders of Judaism, explicators of Judaism, since Moses himself, according to most Jewish people. And Maimonides says that therefore in the future, at the time of the Messiah, before building a Beis HaMikdash, before building a holy sanctuary for God in Jerusalem, you need to destroy Amalek. It might not entirely be something that we have to do in real life, because Mithbalbel Ha'umos, the various nations of the world have been mixed up, and there is really no Amalek right now that's attacking the Jews, but that's a whole separate point that we can't really get into. But essentially, Maimonides makes it clear that this has to be dealt with first, before building the temple. And therefore, over here, you have this instruction from the end of last week's Torah portion to destroy Amalek, continuing straight into this week's Torah portion, discussing Jews going to the holy sacred temple site, where God's name, because of course God is every place, according to the Jewish comprehension, but that God's name is dwelling in this location. So this week's Torah portion, now with the English translation, V'hoya, and when it'll come to pass, kisavai, when you arrive, when you come. Interestingly, the word is kisavai, when you come, because God, of course, according to the Jewish comprehension, is everywhere. He doesn't necessarily reside in any one particular place. So therefore, for example, when God tells Abraham, Lech lecha, go for you, you're the one who needs to leave Haran to go to Israel. But God, of course, is everywhere. Therefore, when God is speaking to Moses, he says, Boy el Parai, come to Pharaoh. Come to Pharaoh. God is able to address Moses wherever he is, saying, come to Pharaoh, because God is there anyway. So God is saying, V'hoya kisavei laretz, when you come to the land, because God is already there and here and everywhere else. V'hoya kisavei laretz, when you come to the land, asher Yehovah elehecha noisen lecha nachala, that Yehovah your God gives to you as an inheritance, v'yarishta, and you do actually inherit it, v'yashavta ba, and you're dwelling in it securely. V'lokachta mereishis kol pri ha'adama, then you should take from the first fruits of all the fruits of the earth, asher tovi me'artzecha, that come forth from your land, asher Yehovah elehecha noisen lecha, that Yehovah your God gives to you, v'samta vatene, and you should place it in a basket. In other words, there's 2 separate sections. It's not just that you should go up. The next thing it says go up to the temple area, but it's not like you'd be like, okay, it's time to go up to the temple. I'm going to take all my stuff. No. Two points. A, take these first fruits and put them in a basket. B, this is what they're for. You take them up to the temple. It has to be with purpose. That's why if you go today to the Western Wall, you can see right around the corner, the Southern Wall, where I've led thousands of tourists over the years as a tour guide. At the Southern Wall, you'll see the steps are various sizes, Part of it is because people might have been bringing animals up those steps, but as well, there's for a gathering of people who don't necessarily stand on steps leading all the way up, small little steps, but also so that you're thinking about it, so that you're not just walking like an automaton straight up, but that you have to actually think about what you're doing. You're stopping every once in a while. There are larger areas you're stopping as you go upwards. So v'halachta el hamakom, you should go to the place asher yivchar Yehovah Elohecha l'shaken shmei sham, that Yehovah your God chooses for his name to dwell there. L'shaken shemo sham, that his name dwells there, because of course Yehovah is not literally living in that place. It is a place, because we are humans, where we are able to, for a brief period of time while we're there, truly commune with the God. It's today, for example, you might go to a museum. You might go to a museum of modern art and see in there, for example, well, I was going to mention Duchamp because he's the most famous example, but people might think I'm being disrespectful by mentioning that here. So I won't. But you go there, you might see something that is simply a part of everyday life. They might just have a bottle of Pepsi in a room. And the point of the museum is not that, hey, look at this bottle of Pepsi that you can't see anywhere else. You can see Pepsi anywhere. I have Pepsi right here. That's an appreciation of what I'm drinking, a Hebrew blessing. But because the space there is specially designated as a place for reflection, as a place where you're not engaged in work, you're not engaged in pursuing anything else, but just open-hearted, open-souled, open-minded, and appreciating what's there, you're able to appreciate the Campbell's soup from Andy Warhol, anything else that's there, in its oddity, in its interestingness, in its various capacities that you don't usually interact with it. Similarly, God might be every place, but for most of us, myself included, of course, for most of us, it's only at certain times where we're really able to dwell in that true, pure connection, whereas in general, we're not supposed to. We have to live life in this world. So it's a place where God's name dwells. It's for us, not for him. Uvasa ela kohen. You should come to the Cohen. There are still many people whose last names are Cohen, who descend from these priests. The word Cohen meaning priest. But it says, Uvasa ela kohen asher yeh b'mahem. You come to the Cohen who is there in those days. In other words, regardless of how you might feel like this priest, this rabbi, this guy, he's not as great as the ones that read in books. No, you relate to the people that are there in your days, in your time. And the priests are people specially designated to serve in the temple itself. So you come to the Kohen that's there in those days, Va'amarta 11, you say to him, Higadati hayom, I am stating today, Liyahoah Elohecha, to Yehovah your God, Ki vosi ala oretz, that I have arrived at this land, Asher nishba Yehovah laveseinu loses lanu, that Yehovah swore to our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to us. Then v'loka hakohen hatene, the Kohen takes the basket miodecha from your hands, v'hinichai lifnei mizbach Yehovah Elohecha, and he places it before the altar of Yehovah your God, v'onisa v'amarta, and you answer and say. In other words, it would appear that this is probably a literal thing that you repeat word for word after the Kohen himself. Although it's also possible that v'onisa v'amarta is that you respond and you say, means that you explain in even greater detail. But it seems pretty important that this text itself should be said. This is the jumping off point. This is the statement of appreciation. V'anisa, you answer, v'amarta, you say, Lifnei Yehovah Elohecha, before Yehovah your God, Arami oived avi. My father was a lost Aramean. This is a verse that is utilized as well in the Haggadah, in the Passover Seder, in the Passover order. In the Haggadah literally means the telling. And over there, it's actually translated a little bit differently from the usual, normal, regular, intended translation, where it refers to the Aramean being Laban, the father-in-law of Jacob, but we're not really going to get into that right now. But Arami Oved Avi, my father, meaning Jacob, and before him Isaac, and Abraham especially, who actually literally came from Aram, who came from Haran, where I lived for a while. As a matter of fact, I keep this up here behind me. This is my grandfather's home, and this over here is Jacob at the well with Rachel and Leah. And that well still exists. In Turkish, Kuyu Yakub. You could go there. I don't necessarily recommend it. There are some dangers in the area. But for me, anyway, it was a life-changing experience to be there in Haran, where my ancestors originally came from. So Arami Oved Avi, my father was a lost Aramean. Then Vayered Mitzrayim, he went down to Egypt. You might recall from the book of Genesis, the end of the book of Genesis, there was Abraham, Isaac, his son, Jacob, his son. Jacob had 12 sons and one daughter. And one of his sons, Joseph, was a bit self-confident. His father loved him more than the other brothers. He was the son from his father's favorite wife. And Joseph was therefore sold into slavery and went down to Egypt. His brothers sold him into slavery. And then Jacob and the rest of his family followed years later. And it says there, they went down to Egypt. Vayagar Sham, and he lived there. It's speaking about the plural because the Jewish people are Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. All Jews, all Israel is guarantors for the other. Almost like a single body sometimes. So even though referring to a large community of people, was saying he dwelt there in Egypt. Bimsema'at, in small numbers. Vayhisham, But over there he became legoy, to a nation. And by the way, you might have heard the word in English, goy. Goy is not a derogatory term referring to Gentiles, people who are not Jewish. It literally means nation. And it's short, in the Yiddish or Hebrew or English, it's short for goyim. Goyei ha'aretz, the nations of the world. In other words, all the nations who are not Jews. But Jews are definitively called a goy as well, right here in this verse. We are a nation. Vayagar Sham, and he dwelt there, in small numbers, Vayisham, and he became there, legoy gadol, to a great nation, otzum, strong, verav, and multitudinous. Vayareu, Isanu Hamsrim, but the Egyptians dealt badly with us. Vaya'anunu, and they oppressed and tortured us. Vayitnu aleinu avodah kasha, and they put hard labor upon us. Vanitzak, and we cried out El Yehovah, to Yehovah, Elihei Avosenu, the God of our fathers. Vayishma Yehovah es kalenu, and Yehovah heard our voice. Vayaras anyenu, and he saw our pain. V'es amalenu, and our toil. V'es lachatzenu, and our oppression. Vayitzienu Yehovah miMitzrayim, and Yehovah took us out of Egypt. B'yod chazaka, with a strong hand. Uv'zroya netuya, with an outstretched arm. Uv'moira, and with a sight, gadol, of greatness, uva oisos, with signs, uva moisim, and with wonders. These signs refer to the various signs that were shown by Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh and to all the Jews, that they're representing God, and with all kinds of wonders, all kinds of amazing things in the early part of the book of Exodus that refer to how the Jews were brought out of Egypt. Vayevienu, and he brought us el hamakim hazeh, to this place. Vayiten lanu, and he gave us es ha'oretz hazois, this land. Eretz, a land that is zavas, flowing, cholav, with milk, udvash, and honey. Va'ata, and now, hine, behold, before you. Hevesi, I have brought es reishis pri ha'adama, the very first of the fruits of the land, asher nasatali Yehovah, that Yehovah gave to me. V'hinachtoi lifnei Yehovah elehecha, and I have placed it before Yehovah your God. Over here, the your God, it appears when he's speaking to the priest, he is being deferential to the priest, because the priest, after all, is literally in the temple every day. The priest is not able to go about and live a regular normative life, and therefore he's being deferential, saying, your God. In other words, our God. He does refer to the plural a couple of times, our and mine, but over here, a couple of times you see he says, your. V'hinachtoi lifnei Yehovah elehecha, and I have placed them before Yehovah your God, v'ishtachavisa lifnei Yehovah elehecha. And then you should bow down low before Yehovah your God. V'samachta, and you shall be happy. V'chol hatoiv, with all the good, asher nasan lacha Yehovah elehecha, that Yehovah your God gave to you, ulevesecha, and to your household. Ata, you, all the Jewish people, v'halevi, and the Levite. The Cohens are a section of Levites, but all the Levites were not given an official place in the land of Israel. They were not agriculturalists. They had a special task from God. So therefore they had to be supported by the Jews in general. The Levites were people who were reliant upon other people to eat. So he's saying you should be happy. The Torah says you should be happy with all the good that Yehovah your God gave to you, ulevesecha, to your household, ata, you, v'halevi, and the Levite, v'hager, and the person dwelling with you. Usually we translate today the word ger as convert, but essentially Israel, of course, is at the crossroads of the entire Mediterranean world, meaning North Africa and essentially Europe, as well as to the north and to the east. We have Asia. To the south, we have Egypt, Africa, and so much else. Israel, this crossroads, obviously had many, many people coming through. That's possibly part of the reason why the land of Israel is given to the Jews. The Jews are supposed to have an influence upon the world. And therefore, there were lots of people who came through, and these people are called dwellers, gerim. They're people who are dwelling in your land. Oftentimes, they're nilvim elecha. They're people who are joining you, traveling along with you. There's various kinds of levels of joining the Jewish people, but all of them have to be taken care of. So you and the Levite and the ger, the person dwelling, asher b'kerbecha, that is among you. In other words, don't forget about any of them. And over here, we come to the samach as the stuma, the closed portion, meaning that this portion ends right here. The next section is connected, but there is a bit of a break. There are larger disconnections. If there's a fey, where there's a larger space left blank in the Torah scroll itself, written in a special kind of ink with quill on parchment. So let's just see the very first verse that continues, because it is connected to what we just read. The very first verse says, Kisachale la'aser es kol ma'aser tvuascha, when you have completed giving tithe, all of your produce, bashana hashlishis, in the third year, shnas ha'maser, which is the year when you tithe, Vinosata, make sure to give it, la Levi, to the Levite, la Ger, to the convert, or the person who is not descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is dwelling with you, la Yasom, to the orphan, ula halmona, and to the widow, va'achlu, v'sha'arecha, v'saveyu, and they should eat them within your gates. In other words, among you, v'saveyu, and they should be satisfied. Very beautiful. And this is what's read tomorrow in all the synagogues in the world.